In this video, I will explain the logical fallacy called the middle ground fallacy, also known as the false compromise or the argument to moderation. I'll begin with the general form, explain why it is a mistake, and use some examples of people making this sort of mistake. Hopefully, by the end of the video, you will be able to spot and deal with this fallacy. And if not, well, some people hate these videos. They cannot stand them. Other people love them, so much so that they watch them continuously every day. Of course, the reasonable position is in the middle. The people who watch the video, like it and subscribe to the channel. So go ahead, hit the like button and subscribe. Fallacies are a mistake in thinking. The middle ground fallacy is a good example of a mistake in how we think. It occurs when one claims the correct position is the one in between two extreme positions, simply because it is a compromise of those two extreme positions. Consider the following general form. Person A supports position A. Whatever the issue that is being discussed, A is just one possible position. Person C supports position C. A and C are two very different positions. Person B claims position B to be the truth, and B is in between A and C. The reason person B supports their position is because it lies in between A and C. They are attempting to appease everyone, or at least A and C, by putting forward a compromise in the so-called middle ground between A and C. This, however, is a fallacy. First of all, position B might not actually be in the middle. For example, position A might be more extreme than position C, and so the middle ground position B would be skewed towards the extreme position A. Or perhaps the population is not equally distributed between A and C. Maybe most of the population supports C. If so, the middle ground position B would also be skewed towards A. But all of this avoids the question of why position B is correct. Why does being in the middle make it true? If A and C are both false, then why would the middle of two false positions be true? Even if they are both true, why would the middle also be true? The logic does not follow. Of course, the reason we think like this is because it is easy. A compromise position is more likely to be accepted by everyone. But just because everyone, or most people, agree with something, this does not mean that it is correct. For that, you need evidence and better arguments. Let's look at some examples of people making this mistake. The first example concerns the River Nile. Imagine two people trying to determine the length of the River Nile. Alice says, "I'm sure it is 1,000 miles long." Bob says, "No, I know it is 5,000 miles long." If you then conclude, based on what Alice and Bob have said, I believe it is 3,000 miles long. This is fallacious. The length of the Nile does not depend on what Alice and Bob think. Picking the average of Alice and Bob's answers is no reason to think that you have the truth. All they have done is guess the length, and if they are both equally good at guessing, then what you have is an estimate of the length based on their guesses. But you still have no reason to believe that your estimate is the truth. The average of two wrong answers is unlikely to be the truth. Even if both Alice and Bob are experts in this field, you might still wonder how their answers can be so far apart. So rather than just taking the average, a better approach would be to ask each of them, why do they think it is that long? How did they arrive at their answer? The next example concerns alcohol. Again, we have Alice and Bob providing two different positions. Alice says, we should not consume alcohol as it leads to an increased risk of heart disease, cancer, liver disease, and violent behavior. Bob responds by saying, no, we should drink it. It relieves stress, makes you feel better. It will make you happier. You might then conclude that consuming a small amount of alcohol is good, as this is a compromise of both Alice and Bob's views. Of course, this reasoning is fallacious. The fact that the conclusion here is a compromise of both Alice and Bob's positions does not necessarily mean that it is correct or true. A better argument for this conclusion might consider evidence for the actual position supported by the conclusion rather than the more extreme positions on either side. The final example concerns the price of an item. Let's say that you are selling a house and you advertise it with a price of 200,000. A man comes along and offers you 100,000. Should you meet him halfway and agree a price of 150,000? The fact that 150 is a middle ground offer, halfway in between 100 and 200, does not necessarily mean it is the correct price. Why should the fact that it is in the middle mean that it is correct? Yes, it is a compromise, and a compromise will in general make an agreement more likely. But if you genuinely believe its price to be 200 and have good reason to believe so, then perhaps you are better off waiting for another buyer to offer the correct price of 200. On the other hand, one can always argue that the correct price is whatever the agreed price is. So agreeing to 150 would make 150 the correct price for the house. But with this type of argument, you cannot also claim that any price is the correct price before reaching an agreement, as this would lead to a circular argument. The final point to make here is that this can be abused. If you know that people are prone to the middle ground fallacy and likely to accept a compromise, and especially if you are the first to set the price, then you can anchor it in your favor. If you are selling, then you can set the price much higher so that even if you compromise, the price is still what you believe is correct. When you see this kind of argument, consider the relevance of each extreme argument to the conclusion. If the argument seems irrelevant, ask for more detail, specifically how it links to the conclusion. Don't assume that a compromise is necessarily correct. There might be good social and psychological reasons for the compromise, but it won't necessarily lead to the truth. As always, politely point out the mistake, develop better arguments, and have more productive discussions. I hope you now have a better understanding of this fallacy.